Hi, my name is Kristen Fabrizio, and I did my research study on the linguistic landscape of Monroe, Michigan. My husband and I have just recently moved here in 2020 with our sweet pup Tucker, and we're fascinated about the city and the history that's incorporated in it. We grew up about 20 minutes north of the city, but we have not quite got to interact or get to know much about the city, so it was interesting to do this research project. So the project and presentation is broken down into four parts. First, we'll go into the introduction and talk about the demographics and history of the city. Then we'll talk about the parameters of the landscape and also the themes that I noticed. Then we'll talk about the types of tensions that were noticed in the landscape and finish with the conclusions and implications that I was able to think about and ask questions about on the landscape. So first, let's talk about the demographics and history. So Monroe, Michigan is in the most southeastern part of Michigan. It's 30 miles south of Detroit, but 17 miles north of Toledo, Ohio. It was founded in 1785, making it the third oldest community in Michigan, and not city, but it's the oldest community. So it finally became a city in 1837. So definitely a lot of history here in Monroe. So as far as demographics, the population is 19,775. Within the landscape, there's one public system and three private school systems, which are predominantly Catholic. Then there's one community college, and I also thought it was interesting to note that 20.9% of the population have a bachelor's degree or higher. And I asked the question if that is attributed to the community college. As far as ethnicity, predominantly Caucasian or white alone, which is 89.6%. Then the next closest is 5.1%, which is Black and African American alone. I did notice that the veteran population is quite prevalent in Monroe, so I did want to get that information, and it's 7.8% of the population, which, just out of curiosity, the national was 7.3. So we're just a little bit higher on that average. And as far as the poverty rate, it's 19.5% in the community. And again, out of curiosity, I compared that to the national average, which was 10.5%. So definitely quite a bit higher when you talk about that poverty rate. And as far as languages, it's 96.5% English, and then the next closest is 2.1% Spanish. So very strong English presence. As far as history, Monroe is located off Lake Erie, as well as the Raisin River, which is a really important staple and part of the community. So Monroe was first settled by the Potawatomi tribe of Indians, and then from there, the French missionaries and fur trappers moved in and settled the land just a little bit more. Another important part of Monroe is the River Raisin Battlefield Park, which is a site of the War of 1812 and is now a national park. Also, the city vision encompasses economic development as well as historic preservation. And I think that you will really see how that evolves and is noted in the landscape. So let's get into the geographical location that I studied, as well as the themes that I noted and want to discuss. So this is a image of where the linguistic landscape took place. You can see that the Raisin River goes right through the middle, and down here is the downtown area. It's about a 1 square mile that I try to stay within. So in downtown, you can see restaurants and government offices like the courthouse, the local library, a lot of businesses and shops. There's the schools, lots of churches, public and private offices, and then there's also the news station and many, many parks for the residents to interact with. Literacy is also deemed an essential and important part of the community. So when I was doing these observations in this area, I really noticed how important literacy was. So from that, I drew 5 different themes. The first was historical literacy, then leisure literacy, which I broke down into leisure literacy informational and leisure literacy educational. Then there was informational and functional literacy. Then I found talked about the cultural literacy, and then one of the newer ones that I noticed due to the current situation of COVID-19 was health literacy. So as far as historical literacy, one thing that I noticed was a lot of the original structures downtown. And I chose this picture because it was a plaque for the 100-year-old centennial of Monroe Bank and Trust. And it was on the original structure of that building. So it really proves how old some of these buildings downtown are. This one was really interesting. It talked about the old whipping post. So downtown in the plaza area, this sign describes that this used to be where the old whipping post was. And I find it pretty interesting that is monumental enough to put on a historical sign. So I got to ask the question of who decided that that was something that we should mark. And then you also see lots of directions from the government offices showing where to go. And then I do love how many artifacts are posted around the city with literacy, which this is difficult to see, but the literacy that describes where they came from and what they're about. So as I noted, leisure literacy can be broken into informational as well as educational. And with the leisure is a really big part of Monroe. There's always something going on, but I didn't expect to find the educational part. So as far as informational, there's lots of event postings of all the things that are taking place. There's park rules to show you all the information from around the city. But then the educational one was where it got interesting. So this post shows about the type of fish that are in the river raisin, talks about what fish are safe to eat, and more facts and information about it. And then also there are signs that say proud to be a reader all throughout the city at businesses, residents, and it really shows me how important literacy is to the community. And I think about all the school options that families have and how this informational just in the landscape ties into how important education is. Next, there's the informational and functional. So one part of Monroe I did notice is that there were a lot of for sale signs. And that made me question and kind of tie it back into the vision statement of the economic development. And it was interesting to see so many for sale signs. So I wonder if that's due to the pandemic or potentially we were already on the downfall before then. And then I noticed the payment options varied quite largely. So there were some businesses and areas such as this coin meter that showed that they're cash only and coin only. But then there are other businesses that have updated to the current standards of payment, such as the Square, Visa, Apple Pay. And so there's a large variety there of payment options. The other thing that really varied was the business hours. And so in the whole surrounding area, the norm is that they have shortened Saturday hours and close on Sunday for most businesses. Now, restaurants typically have that little bit of a later night on Saturday, but almost all of them downtown are closed on Sunday. So it's interesting to see. And that kind of as me ask that question, does it tie back into historical context and religious context of having that Sunday off? Just something to notice. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the tensions. As far as cultural literacy, again, I mentioned that there's a lot of veteran support in the area. There are many halls that support the veterans, and then I go into the Christianity, strong Christianity presence in the community. So this was a Catholic charity that's downtown, and this is just one of many signs of the amount of Christian churches and areas in downtown Monroe. And even in times of hardship, they're adapting to Facebook live streaming and making it available to the residents of the city. And this one was a really sweet cultural literacy, showing that the local businesses support the local schools and the Catholic schools. So this sign is "Hey Falcons Believe" during this really hard economic COVID time. The last category that I think is more prevalent now due to the COVID pandemic situation, and I noticed that there are quite a few of these signs around the city, kind of talking about how to not spread germs and how to stay safe. And then almost every single business that you look at has this posted in the front window, talking about the new regulations and new rules due to COVID. So let's get into multiple couple of different tensions that I noticed throughout this study. So the first was the economic tension that we kind of talked about with those business hours. So if residents and consumers aren't able to get to the business hours with shortened business hours on Saturday and closed on Sunday, then typically some of their economic or some of their paycheck is going to go to a local corporation rather than shopping small. And so that those types of hours don't really appeal to the consumer or the residents of the area. Another one that I noticed was the political tension, and not just in political signs around the city, but more in the COVID postings on the storefront, talking about the government regulations. So Monroe is a largely conservative area. I pulled this political map from 2018, and it shows that Monroe County is bordered by Democratic counties, but Monroe typically, most of the time, is more conservative. And so that is really noticeable in the storefront postings describing how they are complying and passive aggressively complying with the orders from the governor. And then the last one I noticed is that the landscape is really monolinguistic. It doesn't welcome diversity much. And if you don't speak English, it would be very difficult to navigate. So with that, let's go to the conclusions and implications. So Monroe cares about the residents and community is one of the big things that I noticed. They give lots of opportunities to interact with businesses and other residents, as well as the natural landscape, which is a big part of the preservation in the town. Monroe also values education and literacy, and you can see that through the educational signs on history, the many schooling option families have, the leisure informational sites, the ability to access the local library, and off that, being illiterate in this type of town would make it very difficult to navigate. There's not a lot of symbolic um, parts of the landscape. And the last one is Monroe really values economic and historical preservation. We discussed that, but that leaves me two questions. How can the city persevere in times of economic hardship? With the pandemic, things are very difficult in the economy. And so, how can Monroe survive this economic hardship and not have as many of those for sale signs as I saw? And then the other question is, how can we maintain historical foundations while adapting to the current culture? So things are changing daily, especially in the technological world. So how can Monroe continue to keep that history alive in the city, but also adapt to some of the current culture and to draw some new residents in? So I wanted to leave us with this vision statement. The community has shared a vision that seeks to balance the opportunity of economic development with the stewardship that is required for historic preservation. I think that's a very powerful message, and it's really incorporated in the landscape. So it does tie back to the mission statement or vision statement very well. This is downtown Monroe, and it one of the quotes I wanted to add is home isn't a place, it's a feeling. And I think that Monroe really truly does encompass that. It truly cares about its residents and the education and the people that live in it. But the one thing that's missing is that diversity piece. So just continuing to ask those questions to grow the city in all areas. So thank you for looking and watching my presentation. It was truly a joy to learn about Monroe. And I wanted to leave us with this last graphic. It says raisin expectations. So it's kind of a play off of the Raisin River and also kind of ties back into Monroe's mission and vision statement of raising those expectations and holding ourselves, continuing to move forward and meeting those expectations so that Monroe can be a great place to live and play. And so if you have any questions about Monroe, please don't hesitate to reach out. Here's my email as well as my Twitter, and I would be happy to answer those. So these are my references. Again, thank you for viewing this presentation and learning about Monroe with me. Have a great rest of your day and take care.